I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Father, we thank you for all those who paid the ultimate sacrifice to defend this country, and praise you for all the graduates last week, and pray that you be with them as they begin their lives. Pray that you be with us this evening as we do the people's business. In your name we pray. Amen.
Good evening, Mr. Chair. The first item on your agenda this evening is the approval of the consent agenda, including additional items on the consent agenda. The additional items for consideration this evening is the reappointment of Mr. Hart Rutherford to the Economic Development Authority, the EDA, representing the Lee Hill District. The term expires 3/31/23. The second item is reappointment of Josh Gata to the Economic Development Authority, the EDA, representing the Chancellor District. The term expires 3/31/23. And those are the only items for additional consideration this evening.
Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Motion to approve the agenda with the added items.
If there's no discussion, we can vote.
Seven yes, the motion passes.
The next item on your agenda is the presentation of the consent agenda. If I can have the floor computer again, please. Thank you. Item number one is the approval of the May 14th, 2019 board meeting minutes. Item two is the appointment of Lori Newman as the Human Resources Director. Item three is to approve the mutual automatic aid agreement for fire and EMS between Spotsylvania County and Louisa County. Item four is to approve the mutual automatic aid agreement for fire and EMS between Spotsylvania County and Orange County. Item five is to approve the mutual automatic aid agreement for fire and EMS between Spotsylvania County and Stafford counties. Item six is to approve a proclamation supporting the 2020 U.S. Census and formation of a complete count committee. Item seven is the authorization for public hearing of amendment to Spotsylvania County Code Chapter 7, Section 89, regarding the location of the central absentee voter precinct polling place. And that is your consent agenda for this evening.
Does any supervisor wish to pull any items from the consent agenda? If not, we can open the public comment on the consent agenda. Is there anyone signed up?
No, sir.
Is there anyone who did not sign up who wishes to speak to consent agenda items only at this time? Seeing none, we'll close that public presentation and entertain a motion on the consent agenda.
So moved.
There's no discussion, we can vote.
Seven yes, the motion passes.
The next item on your agenda this evening is public presentations.
There are no citizens signed up to speak.
Is there anyone who did not sign up who wishes to address the board at this time? If not, we'll close public presentations.
The next item on the agenda, Mr. Chair, is board reports.
Mr. Benton?
All I wanted to bring up was the, I guess for the Planning Commission, we had talked about it earlier about the iPads and emails for them. I think the emails have already been done though, haven't they?
I believe there were 5 commissioners that wanted emails, and I believe those have been set up.
All right. And I was just going to ask that I guess I need to make a motion that we approve the iPads/emails for the planning commissioners that want them and need them for the use in their positions.
There's a motion on the floor. Is there any discussion?
The iPad.
Oh, yeah. Those are, yeah.
If there's no formal discussion, we can vote.
7 yes, the motion passes.
Now, I just want to make sure, do we need to discuss where these funds come from to do that or anything, or will you work that out?
No, sir, I believe that's all. We can work that out.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's all I have.
Mr. Marshall?
Just one quick thing. I want to thank you to the Central Rappahannock Regional Library. Tonight they opened the satellite branch at the Partlow Ruetan. Thank you to that Ruetan organization for providing us the space. I stopped by there this afternoon. It seems like it's definitely going to be a very popular event in our county. Every Tuesday night from 4 till 7 they will be open there. So appreciate that.
Mr. Skinner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I'd like to do two things. One is, if we can get with VDOT, I know Falcon Drive and that area, the grass is 3 feet tall. And I understand that VDOT's limited, but we ought to be able to have VDOT contract that out 2 times a year. And right now, I'm afraid that anybody walk down the sidewalk on Falcon Drive because you'll probably end up with 5,000 ticks all over you.
Yeah, yes, sir. We actually have a separate grass cutting agreement that we wrote off of VDOT that allows us to cut the corridors. And I believe Falcon Drive, being that it's there at Mine Road by Route 1, we can get that. I can go ahead and get that cut.
And at the other time, then would you let them know what Mine Road looks like too?
I can do that.
Because people who live on Mine Road actually cornered Mine Road.
Okay.
They don't have to cut, and they shouldn't have to cut it. And with all this rain that we've had in the beginning of the year, it's it's pretty poor.
Yeah, I believe VDOT's on. I believe VDOT only cuts it a couple of times a year.
Yeah, twice a year, but
Yeah.
you know what? In situations where we've had a lot of rain, we're cutting our yards 3 times a month.
Right.
Every 10 days.
Yes, sir.
And yeah, I think it's just important keeping Spotsylvania. People come to want to visit and see what they say. They see the sidewalks covered and everything. It's just not a place where I want to come to if that's the type of consideration. So we ought to mention that to VDOT when VDOT comes next time and say, hey, look, tell us why you're only cutting it twice a year. And they're going to say money, but ask them what we can do.
Yes, sir.
And the other thing is I'd like to also congratulate all the graduates, 2019 graduates, all the high schools around there. And I know the graduation rate is quite high here in Spotsylvania. I don't know exactly, but I know that Dr. Baker tells us that probably won't have that until late July, August. So I would like to at least announce that once we got that figure. But we do know that the scholarships this year from the 5 high schools ranged total around $36 million. And so when you talk about your return on your investment, and even if we gave them $3 additional million or whatever it is, I mean, that's 900%, even more than that probably. So that's not right too. That's close to 100, you know what I'm saying, 9,000%. Well, it's worth our investment. It's one of those things we can certainly be proud of, and that I know the parents that from the children who receive it are very happy because that's less money they have to put out of their pockets. And some of these children would never go on to college either if we didn't support them like that and they didn't get these scholarships. So once again, congratulations to all of them. And I still think, too, one of the priorities of this board would be help the school division also to really start working on the VOTEX. I mean, it's so important that after 4 years here, at least students can go out and at least, be adequately trained, to be trained, but on the site. And so I hope that we can work closely, Ed, with Dr. Baker and see what the county can do to help in that, because we have an awful lot of backing from developers and stuff of that nature that are interested in donating. So that's all I have, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Mr. Yakabouski?
Thank you. I have a few things I wanted to bring up. One is the grant program that the General Assembly passed for stormwater fixes. I know it goes into effect in July, but I would like to have on the agenda in the next couple months some money that we can put into that to start that program up. I was thinking 25,000, something like that. The second item that I attended a community meeting for a upcoming rezoning application, and several items, obviously, dealing with Lafayette were brought up since the rezoning is in that area. One of the items, and I'd like to have staff look into this a little bit further and see if we can put it onto our legislative agenda in some manner, is, and this is the second time I've heard of issues like this, when clearing is done of property and it affects the neighboring houses, especially in our primary settlement districts. It's done outside of our typical conditions because it's treed land, and there's terrible runoff that goes along with that in several cases. I want to see if there's a way that we can strengthen what the county can do, not to be prohibitive with it, but just to not be so detrimental to the neighbors when these tracts of land are cleared. Another item is that came up from that too is Lafayette funding for improvements. FAMPO, it's been about 13, 14 years now, did a study of improvements for Lafayette, but of course it's cost prohibitive. Nobody has any money, and so it kind of got shelved, and but the problem never went away. So I'd like to ask the Transportation Committee, or put on the board agenda, however we want to do it, to see if there's any small fixes that can be done. I know of one with the improvement at Harrison and Lafayette. That will be an improvement, but anytime from 4 to 6 on a weekday, you try to head down Lafayette, and it's just a parking lot. And it's only going to get worse with what the city has done. If anybody's taking a ride down to the Blue Gray and seeing all the wonderful clearing that they've done with more houses to come, which means just more traffic. And so I'd like to see if we can at least get ahead of that, though we are behind on everything else dealing with Lafayette. Another item I would like to see on the agenda in the next few months is a discussion at the board level. I think we need to have it. Nearly 5 years ago, we had a transportation bond that the voters said, yes, go ahead and do. The status of that, I know we've done some projects, but not a lot of projects. I think that we need to get moving on that. Our bond authority runs out, not very shortly, but shortly enough. And we need to see if we can get some more of our transportation improvements done at that time too, with bond funding. And then also this upcoming weekend is the Soapbox Derby down at the Raceway. So look forward to, I won't be able to be there unfortunately, but it was a great event last year, and I hear it's going to be even bigger this year. You'll be there? Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Just one thing. Well, Ed, I'd like to follow up with what Gary had said about the grass cutting and stuff, because I know I've sent a couple of requests in from residents and stuff. So just countywide, if you're going to look at some of those areas that need cut, just to make sure for safety and, you know, visibility on the roads particularly. So that's all I had. Thanks.
Mr. Ross?
Just my congratulations to the students of 2019. It was quite a sight to see, and very proud of all of you. That's it.
And I have no report.
Mr. Chair, I had a couple of announcements. Would you like me to do them now or
Sure.
before we adjourn? Although there's no administrator's report on here, but there are a couple of announcements. The first is that Todd's Tavern Convenience Center and Community Center is going to be closed on Tuesday, June 4th, and will reopen Wednesday, June 5th at noon. This is for parking lot, asphalt repairs, sealing, and striping in the parking lots. Also, county offices will be closed July 4th and July 5th in observance of Independence Day. And then just a quick update on the historic courthouse stabilization. The Historic Preservation Committee provided direction to staff to work on an uncovered stairway with wrought iron railings to address the side exit of the historic courthouse. The formal notice to proceed on the Judicial Center expansion will be established as June 3rd, 2019. The contractor will be working on relocating the HVAC and building support equipment over the next few months. Courts will not be impacted until around October of this year, when work will begin on the building itself. And then finally, the Spotsylvania County Animal Shelter. The contractor has placed base asphalt on the parking area and is preparing to install stormwater piping around the existing shelter. Customers should anticipate impacts to the public parking area at the utilities building starting next week, and you're asked to follow site signage to the correct parking areas. And that's all. Thank you. And now we have Mr. Cole with a presentation on the DSS Advisory Board.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. This is to follow up. A few months ago, I gave you a presentation on the DSS Local Administrative Board, and you asked me to come back with a recommendation regarding the establishment of a multi-member administrative board, and that's what this is. Floor computer, please. This is just a review. I've already shared this information with you. It just provides the duties and responsibilities of the local administrative board as delineated in the Virginia Code. And again, there are two types of administrative boards. Every DSS has an administrative board. And it's up to you to determine which type of board you have. We currently have a single member administrative board, which is made up of a local government official. Traditionally, it's been the county administrator. Currently, it's me, the deputy county administrator. And when you have a single member board, that's when you establish an advisory board. Multi-member boards, just to go over the code requirements for that, they have to be residents of the locality, and they're to be appointed by the Board of Supervisors. Must have at least 3 members for a multi-member board, but may have more. There is no upper limit. And 1 supervisor may serve on the board. Once they're appointed for terms. They have to receive annual training, and a member of the board may only be removed for cause by the Board of Supervisors. Most agencies across the state use multi-member administrative boards. However, most larger agencies, which is in the category of Spotsylvania, use single-member boards. I recommend the establishment of a multi-member administrative board with a 7-member board, 1 member from each of your districts. One of them may be a supervisor, but that would be at the board's discretion. And I recommend that the compensation be fairly significant for a board, since this is a board with substantial responsibilities, and I'd recommend something like $400 a month, and then $100 for every meeting they attend. So we would have monthly meetings would be the recommendation. So it would end up being, if they attend the meeting, $500 a month. That is close to what we pay planning commissioners, but it's lower than that. It would work out to be $6,000 a year, where planning commissioners, I believe, make $7,500 a year. The county administrator or his designee would serve as an ex officio or alternate member, would be able to attend and participate in meetings, but would only vote if a primary member is absent. I think it's important that the county administration, have kind of a voice on the board, since these are county employees that we're overseeing. And I recommend that we not implement it until January of 2020. This would, and that we have staggered terms to try to align as closely as possible with the terms of the Board of Supervisors that are making the appointments. A delayed establishment would give us time to develop and vet bylaws, and to schedule and conduct required training. And also there are several outstanding items that we're working on with DSS. One is the either the hiring of a DSS attorney or renewing a contract. There is a pending management reorganization of DSS. I'd like to get that in place before we establish a new multi-member administrative board, and also to hire a new deputy director for DSS. And I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that you may have.
Mr. Benton?
I guess on the other agencies, what is their multi-member personnel? How did you pick 7? Just because there's 7 board
Just
members?
because there's 7 board members, there is no requirement that it be that. The only requirement is it be at least 3. I think it's probably a good idea, to have representation from across the county, and to allow, each supervisor to appoint a representative on that. There's various, you look at them across the state, there's various sizes and compositions of these administrative boards.
What's the typical one?
The typical one, I think, if there is a typical one that I've found, is that it reflects the composition of the local governing body. So, if they have like a 5-member city council or board, usually they'll have a 5-member administrative board, but that's not always true.
Okay. And as far as the pay, you said $400 a month?
$400 a month, and then $100 for each meeting they attend. So it would work out, if you attend all your meetings, it would be $500 a month.
Okay.
And like I said, you serve on the advisory board, but that's a fairly, you look at the code, and this is a board with a lot of responsibilities. So I think they need to be, compensated, enough to make it kind of worth their while to serve on it, because you want somebody who's going to, be diligent and take the appointment seriously.
Yeah, I was just thinking it's hard enough to find somebody just for what we do on the advisory board, let alone the
Yeah.
increased responsibilities for a board. I don't know if it would need to be higher or not.
It's your all's call. I mean, you don't even have to do this if you all don't want to. I don't expect you to vote on it tonight or anything like that. I'm just making my recommendation to you, following up as directed by the board. It's totally up to you all if you want to go in this direction, and when you want to do it, and what type of compensation needs to be provided.
And then, I guess lastly, now this board would be able to, if there was a complaint, or to actually have access to the required, or to the needed materials, correct?
There's it depends on which lawyer you talk to. Some would say yes, they can. Some would say no, they can't.
Well, it seems like if it's a board, Mr.
I
Taylor was allowed to look at everything.
Yeah.
Why would the board not?
I would think that if it was considered to be in the best interest of the client, either the child or the APS, client, that I would think that the administrative board should be able to go into closed session and hear some of the details of that case, if it's determined to be in the best interest of the client.
Mr. Ross?
So I'll do a quick follow-up, Mark. Who would then determine if it's in the best interest of the client?
It would be DSS, the DSS workers.
Gotcha. So what is your timeline? If you're shooting for a January 2020 timeline to implement, what your timeline for the Board of Supervisors to give direction and vote on this?
Yeah, I would hope that, you would, if this is what you want to do, give us a couple of months' notice at least, say, October, November, make a decision so that we can get the bylaws and everything done in place and have it ready to go by either January or February to stand up
So-
and get the training scheduled
Gotcha.
probably in January.
So you would actually not start that training until January?
No, because, that's correct, because, we would have to know who the appointees are to make sure they get trained
So
before they're actually appointed.
The appointees would not happen in October. They would happen in January with the new board.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so,
And we would stagger the terms, either 2-year terms or 4-year terms to correspond with the appointing supervisors'
so
terms.
it really wouldn't stand up in January 2020. It would, how
Probably-
long would it take the training to actually happen before
The
they
training is
locked in?
just a one-day thing. And, so that could be scheduled, here locally, or, we could do it in the regional office in Warrenton as well.
And how certain are you about the composition of the multi-member boards as far as, are they indeed the majority is the size of the board or city council that they're, is that something you could come back with us on?
I can do more research on that. I didn't do a comprehensive analysis of the composition of the boards. Just appeared that the ones that I looked at, most of them, appeared to follow their local governing body as far as membership goes.
And this board would be unique, correct, as far as the other boards and committees we have?
Well, it would.
For instance, the planning commission doesn't have hiring or firing authority of EDA members or county employees. Is there any other committee that Spotsylvania County has that actually has that kind of authority and is not accountable to the board, right?
No.
Once they're appointed, they are their own entity.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, as far as I know, there are no other local boards or commissions that have hiring and firing authority. However, the EDA and Planning Commission are appointed to terms. So it's similar to that in that respect. But you're right, this board would have more authority as far as overseeing the function of a department than any of our other boards or commissions.
And I do believe in equal representation. But I also know from my experience that sometimes less is more. In other words, if there's less people on a board or committee I'm on, we seem to get a lot more done. I think, not that my opinion matters, but I think a 7-member board of supervisors is just right, and it keeps us moving at the momentum that we need to move at. From my experience of being on an 11-member FAMPO board, I feel it's too slow, right? It's very hard to get a decision moving forward at the FAMPO level. And I'm also a member of RPV, State Central Committee, which has 80 members, and we get nothing done. Right? So my preference would be, and I'm just throwing this out there for comment, is to go with the 3-member board, because I really would like to see this board, unlike and not that I'm not grateful for every single board and committee we have, but they're going to be different and unique than any board or committee that we have. And I think everybody does take their job seriously, but this is actually going to be more of a job than perhaps even the Planning Commission. And not to take away from anything that they do, because I know in this past year our Planning Commission's been plenty busy, and it's probably been a full-time job for many of them with the S-Power and some other issues that we've had come through. So I'm not trying to take away from them, but I see this as a very unique committee if we're going to go this way, and I'd prefer that we would go down to 3 members. How they're appointed or collectively appointed and assigned by this board, and we could still stagger their term, but I would actually say let's increase their pay. If you were doing a 7-member board, and I see it's $500 a month, that's $3,500 a month for all 7, I think a $1,200 a month compensation for 3 of them at $3,600 a month would attract, at least give somebody, not really an incentive to serve because it's not like the big bucks for sure, but at least it's something that says, you know what, we recognize that you've got a specialty, we recognize that you've got a duty, you've got a responsibility here, and we would like to offset that with some kind of compensation more than the $500 a month. And I'll go back to my experience on a 3-member board, a 7-member board, 11 and 80, and definitely the 3-member board can take more in, can get more done, and can work things through faster. So thank you.
Mr. Yakabouski.
Sorry, did you want to go first? Okay. First of all, thank you, Mark, for the presentation. Secondly, I think it's very important that what we need to do is we need to educate the public as to why. What is the purpose behind doing something like this? Especially when you would have a board that would have so much power that really are unaccountable unless we write the bylaws in a manner in which we could hold them accountable and remove, if possible and necessary. But I always go back to why are we changing things? What are we trying to accomplish out of that change? What is the goal that we are looking towards fulfilling, and will this fulfill that goal? And so I don't think any of that has been laid out, and I don't expect it to be laid out this evening. But I do think that those are the answers or the questions that need to be answered, not only for us, but also for the public that is out there too. The other question that I would have too is to see that larger agencies, and I would assume 100,000 and more people roughly, is that what a larger, or is it caseload?
It depends on caseload and the number of employees.
Okay, so it's not population based?
No. It's,
okay. My question would be, obviously other people have gone from a single to a multi and then back to a single again. If we can find out why, and so we don't repeat the same mistakes, or did they find out that having a multi didn't accomplish the goals that they had in mind, and it sounded good at the time, but it didn't really get anything accomplished. And then also the ones that do have single member boards, if you can let us know which ones those are. I mean, are we talking about the big guys, the Fairfax and the Loudons and the Prince Williams and those?
we can get you a list.
Yeah, because that to me is very important, because they have already been there and gone down the paths before we have. And so I don't want to, number one, go down those paths and making the same mistakes if we can avoid them. And number two, if we can make sure that when we do go down there, any of the rationale for doing it, from them at least, and then backing up and going back to what they had, that would be important to have, just so that we can see if that is something that we really want to do, because this is a big change. But I do think that we should go slowly with it. As far as the size of a board, I personally like it when government doesn't do much, so I don't like boards really accomplishing much. But in cases like this, they might need to, but I do think representation from every district is necessary, simply because then we each have a bit of responsibility in the committee that has been set up as elected officials. And I would hate to see just 3 members, and one of those members is not my appointee, and it's easy to point fingers and go, well, I didn't appoint him. And I don't think that that's the right way to do things either. And sometimes, Mr. Ross, having an 80-member board, especially at RPV, it's actually a good thing that they don't do much, and many times. But those are the questions that I would like to answer, because I think that once we do this, if we're going to do it, that we do it right, and we go full steam ahead. I don't want to go into it and then back up and say, oh geez, we didn't think about this. So the more time we can take, the better, to make sure that we get it right.
Sure.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Skinner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say what Chris said. I think it's important that each one of us, if we're going to go with a multi-member, that it's dependent upon us to go find that right person. And, you know, it's, I hate to say it, but it's like you're going to appoint a Supreme Court justice. You get one chance, and you want to make sure that you do it right. You want to get a person out there that has, you know, a lot of good choices. But I think it is really important to give us each a representation out there on the board. The other question is, I'm not really sure that it's smart that a supervisor would be in there, okay? That's why we're putting those appointees to keep us, or to keep our opinions or the power. And I'm not sure if people wouldn't feel a little bit uneasy with the supervisor sitting in there and everything. I think this committee should be free to speak among themselves without retribution. Of course, it's in closed session. I mean, this stuff stays in there, and they've got a very big responsibility.
Yeah, no, you know, it would be up to your all's call if you wanted a board member or not. The code does allow for one member of the local governing body to serve as a member of the board, but it's totally up to you whether or not you make use of that or not.
Okay. And then you're shaking your head out there. When you say, now this board is going to make the same decisions as as Mark would have made, Mark Taylor made, or would Mark Cole as the board, one-member board. So why would that change the information that they can get differ from what Mark Taylor got or what Mark Cole had got? Can you explain that to us? Because I know when we said, would they be able to get the information needed? So,
Mr. Skinner,
yeah.
I can answer that. The local board would. This is just the composition, whether it's multi-member or a single member. They would be entitled to the same information Mark Taylor would, to be able to interest themselves in the social services that are offered by the county. So this is just with respect to the composition. You know, the local board, everything that the local board could have learned as a single member, the local board as multi-member will be able to access the same information. What we've learned, though, is, you know, practically speaking, it differs across the Commonwealth as to what the typical case is that a locality director may take before the local board. And that differs from locality to locality. But, you know, from a bottom line standpoint, you know, the multi-member board will be able to access information the same as the single member board.
And Mark, the last question I have is, so the board's sitting out there. Not every decision made by DSS is going to be questioned. So this is only pertaining to where there is thoughts that, you know, maybe DSS isn't going in the right direction, and very similar to what we had in the past year or so. Is that correct? I mean, we will not be, or this board will, I should say the board that we're trying to put together.
Yeah, it should not, you know, get down in the weeds of the day-to-day running of DSS. They're responsible, according to code, to administer the applicable provisions of the law, and so forth, and kind of just be the high-level overseer of DSS operations, but it's not intended for them to get down into the weeds of the day-to-day operation of DSS. You know, where if there are you know, issues that rise to a higher level or higher profile, they may want to get, you know, look into those issues and things like that. But like I said, you know, they're just supposed to oversee DSS at a high level.
Okay, so the last question then would be, at what level, and we can take the last case that we had, that the family didn't feel like DSS was moving in the right direction and stuff of that nature. But on a day-to-day, you know, what's it going to take? Somebody to say, I demand to see, or I demand that the party, the advisory board, take that. I mean, this isn't meant to go in front of them first or DSS, and then this committee questions DSS on everything they do, right?
They would have the authority to look into matters regarding DSS if it came to their attention or if they felt that it was warranted.
Yeah.
But like I said, it's not the intent for them to be the kind of day-to-day decision makers in the operation of DSS. That's what you have a director for. And so, it's similar to how you all oversee the county operations. You have a county administrator who's responsible for the day-to-day running of the government organization and the departments, and you provide, high-level guidance and things like that. And of course, when issues rise to your level, you ask us to look into it and get information and details on it. And if there's an issue, you ask us to handle it. I would think it would be a similar role for this board as far as DSS goes.
Well, and I hope it would roll that way. I mean, it's just like they have an opportunity to say, no, we really don't think it's necessary because DSS director has told us this, this, and this. And once they know all that information, they may agree.
Yeah.
And so if they don't, then they can go on. But I certainly don't think this position is a day-to-day situation. I think that is handled by the director.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, they do, according to code, they can direct the DSS director.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's true.
Yeah.
Okay, and I hope that board would be reasonable in all their actions. Thank you.
Mr. Ross?
So I agree with what Mr. Yakabouski said. It's very important to get to why. Why would we want to make a change? And I don't want to put you on the spot or Ed on the spot, but I personally feel one of the whys is it's kind of like a B billet in the military, right? You might be an aviator and assigned to fly, but then you also might do the legal officer job in the squadron, which could be a lot more work. And I think when you're putting that, this is me, if you're putting that additional work of oversight and policy onto a person, the county administrator in this thing, and now the deputy county administrator, who's already pretty tapped, that's a good why. But I agree that the things that Mr. Yakabouski asked for, it would be great for us to have, and breaking that down and why others move from a single to multiple and then maybe back. I think it's an excellent idea. I don't think this is about a single case. I know Mr. Benton's on the Social Services Advisory Committee. Is that correct? So in that capacity, do you mind if I ask you a question or two? So have you ever set policy?
No.
No? Have you ever, what's the main function of the Social Services Advisory Committee today? Is it mostly looking at what organizations are going to get funded from Spotsylvania County?
In my opinion, yes.
Is there anything else that the Social Service Advisory Committee does today as far as setting policy? And by policy, I mean like being able to take pictures of your child when visiting, or if a child's removed, is there a discussion about it afterwards between those that have the authority to do? That's what I see this policy committee in doing is, looking at standard operating procedures, looking at policies that are in effect now and saying, do they make sense? And maybe they all do, and that's great. Or maybe there's some input that we can have and say, you know what, why don't we let a parent take a picture of their child when they come and visit and send it to grandma? These are the things that I see the committee doing that is not happening today, and that, quite frankly, I think the county administrator or deputy county administrator are too busy to actually take initiative and do it. I mean, if it's not a priority, if it's not something that you're responsible for full-time, I just don't see it getting done. And since 1998, we have had a single-member board. And I don't want to make this about one case. I don't think it is. I think it's about policy, procedures, standard operating procedures, things that you're very familiar with, being an aviator, Mr. Skinner. And those need to happen. Those need to be looked at. They need to be reviewed, I would say, on an annual basis, just like we review our bylaws on an annual basis. So, thank you.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Mr. Cole, so a couple quick ones here. I don't know, as you gather additional information, I think there are a number of people that may already be trained. I know a few that are trained, so I don't like the idea of dragging this out for another year. I mean, if we think that this is important to do, we should, execute this sooner than later. And again, I think some of the questions, there's a lot of information out there, but there's a lot of other organizations that do this, so there's probably plenty of procedures, bylaws and all that are in place that we could adopt fairly rapidly and, put this board in place in 6 months instead of a year from now. So I'd like you to kind of take that into consideration as you gather the remainder of the information here.
Right. I will say that, we do have, bylaws or kind of governing documents from some other localities, and we are looking at that, and as we, if the decision is made to proceed with it, that, we would use those in drafting our own bylaws. However, I will also say, we found out that there are some local administrative boards out there that are operating without any bylaws or anything like that. They're just kind of, I guess, Robert's Rules of Order is it for them, so.
Mr. Benton?
Yeah, I agree with Ms. McLaughlin. I think we ought to, just my opinion, just move forward with this. And you mentioned the bylaws. That's going to answer a lot of questions about what we're, as a board, would be allowed to do, when we can investigate, or I'll say investigate, look into a complaint on DSS, something like that. And I would suggest that we have either yourself or Mr. Petrovich. I know you kind of oversee DSS, so my suggestion is that you be on it, but maybe a non-voting member. But you at least ought to be there to hear what's going on, and especially if you're going to oversee the department for the county. As far as the makeup, I actually agree with Mr. Ross. 3-4 folks at tops, where this board can, through the bylaws, you can make it where this board has to approve either unanimously or by majority who's going to be on it, so you don't get somebody that may not have the knowledge and background needed to be on this board. About it.
Mr. Ross?
I'm sorry for talking again, but that brought up a point too. I mean, if this is like a Supreme Court justice nomination, how much more of that than even the county administrator's position that we're out and have a headhunting agency out searching for? I know there's a big difference between hiring a county administrator or somebody like that than appointing somebody to, say, the Parks and Rec Committee. It's actually a lot harder for me to find somebody that wants to serve on the Parks and Rec Committee by myself than having a collective advertise the county working on, say, three people to be on this, and bringing those resumes of people that are interested in working on, say, a 3-member social services committee, than to go out individually and try to, I mean, I'm not going to put any of us in the spot, but I don't think any of us have all our committees filled presently. Maybe a couple do. I know I'm short on the Minority Affairs Committee. I don't have a representative there yet, and it's very hard to find a position for that. But if we collectively pooled our resources and pooled those interested to come to a single point of contact, and we all voted on them together, I think we'd have a better shot of having a good, a better educated and better functioning committee.
I'll do one last thing. Also, I did take the training for this. And Mr. Cole, I think if I remember right, the board is supposed to evaluate Ms. Crooks, the director, every year. We can be review and see policy and procedures. So, I mean, there's a whole lot more to it than just going and just hearing from a director. I mean, we can.
That's correct. I mean, and I didn't include it in this presentation, but I did include it in the previous presentation as far as the advisory board. There are duties laid out for the advisory board in the code as well, and one of the options is to keep a single-member board and try to reinvigorate the advisory board as well to get them to fully, utilize all the duties that are levied on them in the Code of Virginia.
Well, if it's levied on us, I don't, like I say, we hear from the director, and Ms. Crooks, no disrespect or anything, but I mean, we hear statistics and what they're doing and number of kids in foster care, stuff, this statistical data. But as far as deciding policy and procedure, I don't believe that advisory board's allowed to. Yeah, we can maybe,
But you can make recommendations, all right? Advisory board has no real authority, but they can make recommendations.
We can. But to my, not the time I've been on it so far, we have never, it's never been brought before us to make a decision on whether something's right or wrong for DSS. Just my opinion, I've never been asked if, say, Mr. Ross, a picture taken is, policy is correct or not, or whether there should be something else. You know, I don't know whether, just in my opinion, we've never done that.
Yep.
Mr. Marshall?
Since you've been serving, Mr. Cole, in with the single-member board, I know it hasn't been a long time, but how frequent have you had to serve in that capacity, and how much time have you spent there?
Well, that's kind of hard to say because I meet with DSS, almost on a daily basis, and discuss, what's going on in DSS. So in that role, you could say it was my administrative board role, or you could say it was in part of my duty as a deputy county administrator as well. But like I said, I'm involved with DSS on a daily basis now.
Okay.
Mr. Skinner?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, Mark, what Greg was talking about, policies and stuff like this, there are state policies that DSS has to follow, I believe.
And federal as well.
And federal, and I don't think this board could override those.
No, that's correct.
So it's just any local policy that they may have that they could put their input on or sidewalk. Is that correct?
That's correct. This board has no authority over state or federal code or regulations. However, they can oversee the implementation of that, state and federal code and regulations, and kind of offer ideas on, if they have any, on how it may be better implemented or things like that. But you're correct. State law, federal law, state regs and federal regs they have to comply with that. They cannot do anything contrary to law or regulation.
Well, I'd also recommend, if this board decides to go to 3 people, then I think it's really important that the county administrator and whatever, probably yourself, DSF have a representative there, put this out for notification. And no board member should be involved in choosing it whatsoever. I think this is, if you want to go with 3, because as Mr. Yakabouski said, 3 come up, well, my guy didn't get picked. I thought he was a great candidate, and I knew he applied. And again, I would feel very confident in a 3 board member if the board members themselves would not be involved in it. That way, I would feel that that body, whoever it's made up is, has made a decision on their qualities, their qualifications, and anything else. But then again, I still want to go back. I'd like to go back to 7 members. That would be my priority, so that I could pick out somebody that I think is qualified and would do a good job in it.
Well, you have to appoint the board. The Board of Supervisors has to appoint the board, whether it's a 3-member board or a 7-member board.
Yeah, but that's going to be on a recommendation from somebody else to say, these are the 3 people, or these are the 7 people that we appoint, unless we go to 7 and each district gets a representation, then yes, we would appoint them.
Mr. Yakabouski?
Thank you. Just so that my points don't get lost in the mix, I just want to make sure that the rationale and the reasoning behind this, we've heard that it's not because of one case, but it is because of one case, in my opinion. We weren't sitting here 3 years ago discussing this. So what I would like to understand better is why. And I'm not hearing that. All I'm hearing is, well, there'll be a place that you can go to ask questions. Well, we have one person that did that, and the questions were asked, and the answers were not liked. So how will more members on the board change that? Again, are we creating a committee that will have power that we as a board cannot rein in? To what purpose? What are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to do? Are DSS's numbers so awful Are we trying to step in before the state comes in and takes them over because they're just down in the dumps? And they're not. They're doing an exceptional job. So what is the purpose to having a board? And I think that is the crux to this entire thing, and that needs to be answered. It needs to be answered in the most transparent and open way possible, because if not, this board will fail at what is supposed to happen with it. Or it could be used, I shouldn't say used, it could not fulfill its duties in the proper way. Let me put it that way. And I don't want to hand over power to 3, 7, or however many people it might be without understanding exactly why we're doing it, what is the purpose, how do we know that they're successful, how do we know that they're doing the job that they need to do, because none of that has been laid out yet.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I just will say that, I don't think this board would be ceding any of its authority in that if you, say you establish a multi-member board and you don't like the direction it's going in, this board at any time could say, time out, we're going to have a do-over, we're going back to a single-member board.
Mr. Chairman, if I could. Correct, but it's also being set up as a board to have oversight of DSS.
Correct.
There could be outside pressure for board members, because they will be from the community, to take a look at an issue, because ever since issues have been raised over the past year, I've been approached by others saying that, they had issues to be looked into. So that will happen. And I want to make sure that that board, when they are looking into issues, are doing it to further a goal. And that's where I think that we really need to be careful of what we do. Yes, we can disband it, we can go back to a 1, but I don't want to create something that can do damage.
Yeah, I understand, and just to touch on your core question of why are we wanting to do this, I think it would provide another venue for people who have issues or concerns with DSS to voice them to a board that can actually look into the details of the issue rather than, coming to a Board of Supervisors meetings where you all are limited by law as to what details you can and can't have on a case. I think that's the primary advantage of it, as well as, I think, getting more citizen input into the oversight of DSS.
Mr. Renton?
I know one of the reasons for this that we discussed was to alleviate, to take off some of the load on Mr. Taylor, and then I would assume you too, Mr. Cole. That way you're not thrust in anything that's going to take your time away from the other departments that you're responsible for in this county. I mean, I don't, what that might be, I can't name, but I would rather not have you tied up, just as at the time Mr. Taylor would rather have not had Mr. Taylor tied up in the amount of time he was, where his total focus is away from what the board really is wanting him to do. So that's one of the main reasons I think we discussed several times. So.
Most of my points have been covered. I do agree with Mr. McLaughlin that sooner is better than later, recognizing that we have a lot to do before we can set this up, and also comes back to us to make a decision relatively soon. But there have been requests for information, so I don't think we're ready to do that this evening.
I would just like to emphasize that the DSS Advisory Committee remains in operation until, this committee is set up. I know there were concerns expressed by some of the advisory board members that, I guess we're not going to be around anymore and things like that, and that's not the case. I mean, the advisory board is still fully functional until and if you all decide to stand up a multi-member board.
If there's any more comments, thank you.
Thank you.
We have, Mr. Chair, we have no other items on the agenda before closed meeting.
All right, Mr. Chair, members of the board, this will be a resolution to adjourn in the closed meeting. Whereas the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors desires to adjourn the closed meeting for a discussion, consideration, or interviews of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific public officers, appointees, or employees of the county, specifically the interim county administrator and employees of the Department of Social Services. And whereas the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors desires to adjourn the closed meeting for discussion or consideration of the acquisition of real property for a public purpose or the disposition of publicly held real property where discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining position or negotiating strategy of the public body, specifically discussion of real property in the Berkeley voting district. And whereas the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors desires to adjourn the closed meeting for the consultation with legal counsel employed or retained by a public body regarding specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by such counsel, specifically relating to the zoning ordinance. And whereas pursuant to Virginia Code Section 2.2, 3711, A1, 3, and 8, such discussions may occur in closed meeting. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors does hereby authorize discussion of the aforestated matters.
So moved. We can vote. Hope to point this at the screen, does it?
7 yes, motion passes.
Convened a closed meeting on the state pursuant to an affirmative recorded vote and in accordance with the provisions of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act. And whereas Section 2.2, 3712D of the Code of Virginia requires a certification by this board that such closed meeting was conducted in conformity with Virginia law. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Spotsylvania County Board of Supervisors hereby returns to open meeting and certifies by roll call vote that to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from the open meeting requirements of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act and identified in the motion to convene the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered in the closed meeting.
Mr. Yakabouski?
Aye.
Mr. McLaughlin?
Aye.
Mr. Ross?
Aye.
Mr. Skinner?
Aye.
Mr. Marshall?
Aye.
Mr. Benton? Aye. And the chair votes aye.
Mr. Chair, at this time, I would respectfully request a motion to add to the agenda and then for the approval of the form proposing to increase the salary of the interim county administrator by 5% effective April 9th, 2019. And you have that form before you. A copy of that will be provided to Amy for the record of the meeting.
So moved.
No discussion, we can vote.
7 yes, motion passes.
Mr. Chair, the last item on the agenda this evening is new business, and we have nothing under new business.
I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Guess we have to vote.
Come on.
7 yes.